Hello, and welcome back to Shadow Hollow Whispers. Before we begin, I invite you to share in the comments where you're listening from tonight. Your words bring warmth to these quiet hours. If you find peace in the soft, echoing whispers that drift from the hollow shadows, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another tale whispered from the dark. Now settle in comfortably. Dim the lights if you wish. Let your thoughts grow still, and allow the world outside to gently fade into silence. And let's begin. Story 1. People say everyone has a doppelganger somewhere in the world. Someone with the same face, the same eyes, and the same smile. Most people treat it like a strange but harmless idea. They joke about meeting their double in another country or seeing someone who looks exactly like them in a crowded street. There is another part of the legend that people do not mention as often. According to some stories, meeting your doppelganger is a warning of death. Seeing your own face on another person means that something terrible is about to happen. Some legends even say that only one of you is allowed to continue living. I used to think all of that was stupid. Then I met mine. It happened after one of the worst shifts I had ever worked at a fast food restaurant in Manhattan. Calling the place a restaurant was generous. It was a greasy little box with broken equipment, stained floors, and the permanent smell of old cooking oil trapped in the walls. I hated working there. The salary was terrible, the hours were long, and most customers acted like getting the wrong dipping sauce was the worst tragedy in human history. They shouted over small mistakes, complained about waiting for 5 minutes, and treated the workers like we were too stupid to deserve basic respect. That day had been especially bad. A man screamed at me because his fries were not hot enough, even though I had watched them come straight out of the fryer. A woman threw her drink across the counter because we had run out of a certain kind of soda. Another customer demanded to speak to the manager because I would not accept a coupon that had expired 3 years earlier. The manager was somehow worse than all of them. His name was Dennis, and he acted like managing a fast food restaurant had made him the ruler of a small country. He shouted orders from the back room, blamed us for things that were clearly his fault, and threatened to cut our hours whenever anyone complained. "Eric, clean table 6. Eric, restock the napkins. Eric, why is the line moving so slowly? Eric, stop standing around." I had not been standing around. I had been carrying 2 trays while answering a customer's question and trying to stop the milkshake machine from leaking all over the floor. None of that mattered to Dennis. By the final hour of my shift, my feet hurt, my back was stiff, and my head was pounding. I kept looking at the clock above the kitchen door, but every minute seemed to last forever. When my shift finally ended, I did not even say goodbye. I removed my name tag, threw it into my locker, pulled on my red hoodie, and walked out through the side door. The cold afternoon air hit my face and instantly felt better than the hot, greasy air inside. For a moment, I stood on the sidewalk and breathed. The city moved around me in its usual chaotic way. Car horns blasted from the street. People pushed past one another without apologizing. A delivery cyclist nearly hit a woman crossing against the light, and both of them began shouting as if they had been waiting all day for an excuse. It was loud, crowded, rude, and exhausting. It was also normal. All I wanted was to get home, heat up whatever food I had left in the refrigerator, and fall asleep in front of the television. I lived in a small apartment across town. so I headed toward the nearest subway station. The entrance sat between a convenience store and a closed clothing shop. I walked down the steps while checking my phone. The screen showed several messages from my landlord reminding me that rent was due soon. That was the main reason I kept working at that horrible place. Bill did not care whether I was tired. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, I noticed something strange. The station was silent. Not quiet. Silent. Anyone who has lived in New York knows that silence does not feel natural there. Even late at night, there is always some kind of sound. Trains shake the ground. People talk, argue, laugh, or shout into their phones. Music plays from someone's speaker. A child cries. A homeless man asks for money. An announcement comes through the ceiling speakers, usually so badly broken that no one understands it. But I heard nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no distant train. I stopped halfway down the final set of stairs and looked around. Where the hell is everyone? I muttered. My voice traveled across the station and returned as a soft echo. The ticket booth was empty. The gates were closed, but no workers stood nearby. There were no police officers, no security guards, and no commuters rushing toward the platform. It was late afternoon, one of the busiest times of the day. The station should have been packed with people heading home from work. Instead, it looked abandoned. That was not the only strange thing. The station was clean, completely clean. The tile floor shone beneath the lights. The walls had no dirt, no gum, no stains, and no graffiti. There were no food wrappers or empty cups. There was not even dust in the corners. I had used that station hundreds of times. Usually it smelled like hot metal, urine, old garbage, and sweat. Rats sometimes ran between the tracks, and half the lights flickered like they were about to die. Now it looked brand new. It was so perfect that it made me uncomfortable. For a few seconds, I wondered whether I had entered the wrong station, but that was impossible. The signs showed the correct name. The maps were exactly where they had always been. Everything was familiar, yet completely wrong. I walked toward the turnstiles and looked inside the empty booth. Hello? No answer. I knocked on the glass. Nothing. Under normal circumstances, I paid my fare. Most of the time, anyway. That day, with no one watching, I decided to jump over the turnstile. Usually, getting through without being caught gave me a quick rush of excitement. It felt like winning a small battle against a city that took money from me every chance it got. This time, I felt nothing. The station was too empty. I landed on the other side and listened again. Still no sound. I moved carefully toward the platform. Every step echoed behind me. The bright lights made the clean walls almost painful to look at. When I reached the platform, I expected to find at least one person waiting. There was no one. The tunnel stretched into darkness on both sides. The digital sign above me said the next train would arrive in 2 minutes. I took out my phone to call someone, but there was no signal. That was not unusual underground, so I put it back into my pocket and sat on a bench. The 2 minutes felt much longer. I kept looking toward the stairs, hoping someone would come down. A businessman, a student, a tourist, anyone. No one appeared. Then I heard the train approaching. The sound began as a low vibration beneath my shoes. A light appeared in the tunnel, and the train entered the station with a loud metallic scream. The doors opened. Every car was empty. I hesitated. Something inside me said I should not board. I could have gone back upstairs and walked home. It would have taken a long time, but at least I would have been outside. Then I remembered how tired I was. I stepped into the car. The doors closed behind me. The train began moving. I sat near the middle of the car and looked around. The seats were clean. The floor had no stains. Even the windows looked polished. There were no advertisements above the seats. That bothered me more than it should have. There were always advertisements on the subway. Lawyers, doctors, television shows, online colleges, food delivery services. Something was always trying to sell you something. Here, the spaces above the windows were empty and white. I was so exhausted that my eyelids felt heavy. The bags beneath my eyes felt like they were filled with stones. After dealing with rude customers and dentists for hours, my body wanted to shut down. I leaned back and closed my eyes. Before I fell asleep, I had the feeling that someone was watching me. I opened my eyes again and searched the car. Still empty. I checked the windows, but all I saw was my reflection and the darkness of the tunnel moving behind it. For 1 second, I thought my reflection smiled. I sat up quickly. The face in the glass looked normal again. I told myself it was because I was tired. I had been awake since early morning, and my brain was playing tricks on me. I closed my eyes again. Sleep pulled me under almost immediately. I do not know how long I was asleep. I woke when a harsh burst of static exploded through the train speakers. The sound was so loud that I nearly fell out of my seat. It was the same kind of broken static you might hear from an old television with no signal. I covered my ears and looked around. The train was still moving through the tunnel. The lights flickered. Static continued for several seconds before a voice came through the speakers. It did not sound like a normal subway announcement. The voice was calm, slow, and completely without emotion. We are currently receiving countless reports of an unidentified hostile organism. These organisms will be referred to as alternates. I stared at the speaker above the door. The voice continued. Until we have a complete understanding of the threat, all citizens are advised to remain inside their homes. Lock all doors and windows. Keep access to a loaded firearm or any ranged weapon at all times. My heart began beating faster. You may identify an alternate by its physical characteristics. There was another short burst of static. If you see another person who looks identical to you, run away and hide. I stopped breathing for a moment. If you see a person with a biologically impossible characteristic, run away and hide. The lights flickered again. If an alternate enters your home, do not speak to it. Avoid all communication and physical contact. A low humming sound filled the train. These intelligent life forms use psychological warfare against their victims. They may copy familiar voices, faces, and memories. They may attempt to cause emotional weakness before attacking. I gripped the edge of my seat. The voice paused before delivering the final warning. While direct contact with an alternate is heavily discouraged, citizens may attempt to execute the threat if escape is impossible. The announcement ended. Static filled the car once more, then suddenly stopped. I sat frozen. What the hell was that? I whispered. Hostile organisms? Alternates? It sounded like something from a cheap science fiction movie, not a message that should play on a subway train. My first thought was that it had to be a prank. Maybe someone had hacked the speaker system. Maybe the empty station was part of some strange viral video or marketing campaign. But that explanation made no sense. No one could convince an entire city full of New Yorkers to avoid a train station during rush hour just for a prank. People in New York would walk through a fire if they thought it would save them 5 minutes. The station workers would not abandon their booths. The police would not disappear. And no cleaning crew in the world could have made that station look so perfect. I stood and walked toward the door between train cars. It was locked. I pulled the handle again. It did not move. I went to the emergency intercom beside the main doors and pressed the button. Hello? Can anyone hear me? There was no answer. I pressed it again. Is this some kind of emergency? Only static came through the speaker. Then I heard a voice behind me. Hello, Eric? My entire body went cold. I knew that voice. It was mine. I turned slowly. A man stood at the far end of the train car. He had not been there before. He was tall, almost tall enough for his hood to brush the ceiling. His head was lowered, and a red hood covered most of his face. For the briefest moment, I felt relieved. I was no longer alone. Then I realized he had called me by my name. I looked at his clothes. A red hoodie, faded blue jeans with a tear near the left knee, black Converse shoes with dirty white laces. It was exactly what I was wearing. Every detail was the same. The man raised his head. I saw my own face beneath the hood. My eyes, my nose, the small scar near my right eyebrow. It was like staring into a mirror, except the thing across from me was not moving the way I was. Who are you? I asked. My voice came out weak and unsteady. The man did not answer. He stood completely still and stared at me. His eyes were wrong. They looked like my eyes, but there was nothing behind them. No emotion, no thought. They were cold and empty, like glass eyes placed inside a doll. I stepped backward. The creature tilted its head. The movement was too smooth, almost as if its neck had no bones. I remembered the warning from the announcement. If you see another person who looks identical to you, run away and hide. There was nowhere to hide. I moved toward the opposite end of the car. The creature took one step forward. I took another step back. Stay away from me. It smiled. The smile looked like mine at first, but it kept growing. The corners of its mouth stretched farther than they should have. Please do not run, Eric, it said. This time it did not use my voice, it used my grandmother's. My legs nearly gave out. My grandmother had raised me for most of my childhood. My mother had struggled with addiction, and my father had disappeared before I was old enough to remember him. Grandma had been the person who made sure I had food, clean clothes, and a place to sleep. She had been strict, but she loved me. She used to call me every evening after I moved into my own apartment. Even when I was busy, I answered, because I knew she worried about me. She died 3 years earlier. Cancer. I had been holding her hand when she took her final breath. Hearing her voice again broke something inside me. The creature spoke softly. I miss you. Tears filled my eyes before I could stop them. I knew it was not her. I knew the thing standing in front of me was using her voice because it wanted to hurt me. But knowing that did not make it easier. The voice sounded perfect. Every word had the same warmth and the same tired softness I remembered. Please come here, Eric, it said. Grandma has missed you. Shut up. My voice cracked. The creature took another step. The train began slowing down. I turned toward the doors and saw a station platform outside. It was empty, bright, and impossibly clean. The train stopped. I waited for the doors to open. They did not. I pressed the button beside them, even though subway doors did not work that way. Nothing happened. I grabbed the edges and tried to pull them apart. They would not move. Behind me, the creature spoke again, my grandmother's voice. "Please do not leave me." I pulled harder. My fingers slipped. "I have missed you for so long." I glanced over my shoulder. The thing was coming closer. Its face had begun to change. Its eyes narrowed until they looked like thin black cuts. Its mouth trembled as if it could not decide what shape to hold. Its neck stretched upward, slowly becoming longer. The skin did not tear. It simply expanded. The neck rose several inches, then a foot, bending beneath the ceiling. I backed against the doors. "Do you not love me?" it asked. Its voice changed halfway through the sentence. For the first few words, it sounded like my grandmother. By the end, it sounded like me. "Let me love you." The creature charged. I barely had time to raise my arms before it slammed into me. We crashed to the floor. The back of my head struck the metal, sending a burst of pain through my skull. The creature climbed on top of me and wrapped both hands around my throat. Its fingers looked like mine, but they were longer. Far too long. I grabbed its wrists and tried to pull them away. It was incredibly strong. My lungs began to burn. The creature lowered its face toward mine. Its stretched neck bent like a rubber hose. Up close, I could see that its skin was moving. Small shapes pushed beneath the surface, as if several faces were trying to escape from inside it. My face appeared. Then my grandmother's. Then the face of someone I did not recognize. "You look tired, Eric," it whispered in Dennis's voice. Anger gave me strength. I drove my knee into its side. The creature rolled away, and I pulled myself across the floor, coughing and trying to breathe. It recovered quickly, and before I could stand, it grabbed my ankle and dragged me backward. I kicked at its face. My shoe struck its jaw with a loud crack, but it did not react. Its head twisted to the side, almost completely backward, then slowly turned toward me again. The announcement had warned about impossible physical features. This thing was exactly what the voice had described. The creature lunged at me. We began fighting across the train car. I punched it in the face. It hit me in the ribs. I kicked its knee, but the joint bent in the wrong direction and immediately snapped back into place. Every time I heard it, its body changed to protect itself. Its arms became longer. Its hands grew wider. Its mouth opened until its jaw hung near its chest. I knew I could not defeat it with strength alone. I had to find a weak point. Its stretched neck moved around wildly as it attacked. It was long, thin, and exposed. I reached into my pocket. My fingers closed around my house keys. The creature grabbed the front of my hoodie and lifted me halfway off the floor. Its face changed into my grandmother's again. "Come home with me," it whispered. I screamed and drove the keys into its throat. The metal went deep. Black-red blood sprayed across my face and chest. The creature released me and stumbled backward. A terrible sound came from its mouth. It was a mixture of screams, voices, and static. I heard my grandmother crying. I heard Dennis shouting. I heard myself begging for help. The creature grabbed at the wound. I did not give it time to recover. I rushed forward and tackled it. We hit the ground beside the seats. I pulled the keys free and stabbed its throat again. More blood poured out. The creature clawed at my arms. Its nails cut through my sleeves and into my skin, but I barely felt the pain. I grabbed its head with both hands and smashed it against the floor. Once, twice, again. Its face shifted every time it struck the metal. Mine, my grandmother's, a child's, an old man's, a woman wearing a green sports jersey. I kept hitting it. I do not know how many times. Eventually, the body stopped moving. Its long neck lay twisted beneath it. Its eyes remained open, staring at nothing. I sat on top of it, gasping for air. Blood spread across the floor and soaked into my jeans. My arms were covered in cuts. My ribs hurt every time I breathed, and one side of my face had begun to swell. The creature was dead. At least I believed it was. Then the train doors opened. There was no announcement, no warning. They simply slid apart. I stared at the empty platform outside. I did not want to touch the creature again, but I was afraid it might wake up if I left it on the train. I grabbed it beneath the arms and dragged it through the doors. Its body felt lighter than it should have. I hauled it onto the platform and left it near a bench. The station still looked perfectly clean, but now the creature's blood covered the tiles in a dark trail. I ran toward the stairs. The moment I reached the street, sound crashed over me. Car horns, engines, voices, music, footsteps. The city had returned. Crowds filled the sidewalks. People moved in every direction. Taxis fought for space. A man yelled at a driver who had stopped in the crosswalk. Someone nearby was selling hot dogs from a cart. I stood at the top of the subway stairs, shocked by the sudden noise. No one looked frightened. No one seemed to know that anything was wrong. I turned around and looked back into the station. People were coming up the stairs behind me, a tired woman holding a shopping bag, 2 teenagers laughing, a man in a business suit checking his phone. The station was no longer empty. I pushed through the crowd and moved toward a store window. My reflection appeared in the glass. I looked normal. There were no cuts on my arms, no swelling on my face, no bruises around my throat. My hoodie was clean. There was no blood anywhere. I touched my ribs. The pain was gone. For a long time, I simply stared at myself. My reflection copied every movement. I raised one hand. It raised the same hand. I turned my head. It did the same. Then, just before I stepped away, I thought it smiled. I was not smiling. I have never told anyone what happened. What would I say? That I entered an empty version of New York, heard a warning about creatures called alternates, and fought a monster wearing my face? No one would believe me. They would think I was lying, using drugs, or suffering from some kind of breakdown. Maybe I would think the same thing if someone else told me that story. So I stayed silent. I went home that evening and locked every door and window. I checked beneath my bed, inside the closet, and behind the shower curtain. I left every light on. For several weeks, I refused to use the subway. I walked to work or took the bus, even when it made me late. Dennis threatened to fire me twice, but I did not care. Eventually, life forced me back underground. New York is difficult without the train. The first time I returned to that station, it was crowded and filthy again. Trash covered the floor. A rat ran along the tracks. Someone argued with the worker inside the ticket booth. Everything was normal. I almost laughed with relief, but riding the train has never felt the same. I watch every passenger. I study their clothes, their faces, and their movements. I pay special attention to anyone wearing a red hoodie. Sometimes the train enters a dark tunnel, and the lights flicker. When that happens, I look at my reflection in the window. Most of the time, it behaves normally. Most of the time. There are moments when it seems to move a second too late. Sometimes it looks at me even when I turn away. Once I saw its neck slowly stretch toward the ceiling before the lights came back on. I have read stories online about people slipping into alternate realities. They describe worlds that look almost exactly like ours, except for small differences. Empty streets, silent buildings, missing people, places that are too clean or too perfect. Some claim those realities exist beside our own, and that, under the right conditions, a person can accidentally cross into one. I do not know whether those stories are true. I do not know what caused me to enter that other place. Maybe exhaustion had something to do with it. Maybe I fell asleep at the wrong moment. Maybe there was something unusual about the station that day. Or maybe the alternate brought me there. That possibility frightens me the most. What if it had been waiting for me? What if it knew my name, my memories, and the sound of my grandmother's voice because it had been watching me for years? I killed the creature on the train, but I do not know whether that means I escaped. I sometimes wonder what happened to its body after the city returned to normal. Did it disappear? Is it still lying on the platform in that other world? Or did it get back on the train? A few nights ago, I received a voicemail from an unknown number. There was no message, only breathing and the low sound of a train moving along the tracks. Just before the recording ended, I heard my own voice whisper one sentence. "I miss you, Eric." I deleted the voicemail. The next morning, it was back. I have deleted it 6 times now. It always returns. I still take the subway because I have no choice, but I never sleep on the train anymore. I do not close my eyes even for a second. I sit near the doors. I keep my keys in my hand. And whenever the train becomes unusually quiet, I prepare myself to run, because I know what is waiting in that other world. It has my face. It knows my name. And I do not think I killed it. Story 2. I am what people online would call a Sigma male. No lies, no exaggeration, just facts. My style is always perfect. My confidence is stronger than most people's Wi-Fi, and I never fail a vibe check. Women notice me when I enter a room. My boys secretly want to live my life, and every photo I post gets at least 12 likes within the first hour. That kind of success does not happen by accident. I was born different. I was so Sigma that my father left to buy milk when I was 6 and never came back. Some people might call that abandonment, but I understand the truth. He knew he could never stand beside a future alpha like me. Rather than spend the rest of his life living in my shadow, he chose to disappear. Honestly, I respect it. My mother raised me alone, and she is the greatest woman alive. She supports everything I do, even my podcast about male improvement, dating strategy, and the secret rules of modern society. The podcast is called the Zenecast because I combine Gen Z knowledge with deep thoughts. It earns enough money to keep us comfortable, though my mother also has an OnlyFans account. Before anyone judges her, she only sells pictures of her feet. That makes it classy. My life was going perfectly until one Tuesday morning when I received a strange message on Snapchat. The account belonged to a man I had never seen before. His profile picture showed a bald, heavy-looking guy wearing a round hat and an old black coat. He had a pale face, a small smile, and eyes that seemed almost too dark. I assumed he was using a filter because nobody naturally looked that creepy. His message said, "Your energy has become weak. Your style is old, and your charm is failing. Meet me on Ohio Boulevard at midnight. I can take your game to the next level." I stared at the message while drinking from my Stanley cup. The disrespect was unbelievable. Some random riskless loser had entered my private messages and told me my vibes were stale. Me. Sigma Chad 4269. I almost blocked him immediately, but something made me stop. What if he was serious? A true Sigma is always improving. You cannot reach the top and then become lazy. You must keep learning, watching, and studying the people around you. Maybe this strange man knew a secret confidence technique. Maybe he had discovered some kind of advanced social skill that had not yet reached the internet. His profile still looked weak. He had the body of someone who probably avoided the gym and spent most of his time eating cheese in a basement. I was not afraid of him. I replied, "Midnight. Don't waste my time." His answer came immediately. "I wouldn't dream of it." That should have worried me, but I was too busy beginning my morning routine. I stood in front of the bathroom mirror and practiced mewing for 20 minutes to improve my jawline. Then I performed several facial exercises I had discovered in a video made by a teenager who claimed he had studied human anatomy. After that, I put on my workout clothes and went to the gym. I visit the gym 3 times a week. I mostly take photos, but carrying the phone around between machines still counts as a movement. That day, I completed 2 sets of curls before spending 40 minutes adjusting the lighting for a mirror picture. I posted it with the caption, "No excuses. While you sleep, I build." It was 10 in the morning. As an influencer, I believe it is my duty to spread positivity. People need to see me improving because it gives them hope that they might one day reach 5% of my level. For lunch, I ate a Feastables chocolate bar because it is important to support successful creators. I placed another bar in my pocket for later, then returned home and started a Roblox live stream. I planned to play for only a few hours, but my fans needed me. The chat was moving quickly, and at least 4 people were watching at the same time. I could not abandon that kind of audience. By the time I checked the clock again, it was almost 11. I had nearly missed my meeting with the so-called Rizzler of Ohio Street. I laughed to myself. There was no way this man was a real master of charm. He was probably a lonely old guy who had spent too much time online. Still, I had promised to meet him. And a Sigma always keeps his word, unless keeping it becomes inconvenient. I changed into my best outfit. I wore a Logan Paul hoodie with matching sweatpants. My Crocs were locked in sport mode in case I needed to run. In one pocket, I carried my extra Feastables bar. In the other, I had a small can of branded self-defense spray that I had bought from an influencer's website. I looked dangerous. I ordered an Uber and entered the address the stranger had sent me. The driver was an older man with gray hair, thick glasses, and a military sticker on his dashboard. The moment I entered the car, he started talking. Older people do that. They cannot sit quietly. They always want to tell you about traffic, the weather, their jobs, or something that happened before the internet existed. He asked where I was going, even though the address was already on his screen. "Ohio Boulevard," I said. "I have an important business meeting." "At this hour?" Success never sleeps. He looked at me in the mirror, but he did not reply. A few minutes later, he began telling me that he had served in Korea. I was only half listening. I knew he was probably trying to impress me. Old people love talking about places they visited before we had Google Maps. When we reached Ohio Boulevard, his attitude changed. The street was almost empty. Several shops had closed for the night, and many of the streetlights were broken. The buildings were old, with dark windows and faded signs. A thin fog covered the road, even though the rest of the city had been clear. The driver slowed down. "You should be careful here," he said. I rolled my eyes. "I dropped a young man around your age near this street last week," he continued. "The police found him the next morning in an alley." I looked up from my phone. Was he robbed? The driver's hands tightened around the steering wheel. "I don't know what happened to him. The police didn't release many details. I only heard that the scene was terrible. I waited for him to finish, then said, "Yap, yap, yap." He frowned at me through the mirror. "Young man, I'm trying to warn you. And I appreciate your concern, old head, but my safety levels are maxed." He stopped beside the sidewalk and unlocked the doors. "Call for a ride if anything feels wrong." I climbed out and tipped him 12%. That was generous because his story had lowered my mood. The Uber drove away, leaving me alone beneath a flickering streetlight. I checked my reflection in a dark shop window. I looked fresh. My hoodie sat perfectly, my jawline was sharp, and my Crocs were ready for action. The stranger had no idea who he was dealing with. I checked my phone. 11:59 p.m. The road was silent. No cars passed. No music played from the buildings. Even the city sounds seemed far away. For a moment, I thought the man had lied and was not coming. Then I noticed movement at the far end of the street. A figure was walking toward me through the fog. At first, he looked like a shadow. As he came closer, I recognized the round hat and long coat from his profile picture. His outfit was unbelievably old. The coat reached almost to his knees. His pants were narrow and ended above polished shoes with silver buckles. He carried a black cane topped with a small human skull. The skull looked real enough to make me uncomfortable. The man moved slowly, but there was something strange about the way he walked. His cane tapped the pavement, yet the sound did not match his steps. Tap, step, tap. 2 steps. Sometimes the cane hit the ground even when he was not moving it. He stopped a few feet away from me. Up close, he looked much worse than his photograph. His skin was smooth and pale, almost like wax. He had no eyebrows. His eyes were completely black except for tiny gray pupils. Even so, he smiled like a friendly salesman. "Are you Sigma Chad 42069? He asked. His voice was deep and soft. It gave me immediate creep vibes. "Facts," I replied. "You the so-called Rizzler of Ohio Street?" He spread both arms as though the answer should have been obvious. "What do your eyes tell you, son?" "My eyes tell me I left my goon cave to meet some outdated loser wearing clothes from the 1800s. His smile grew wider. "You came because you were curious. I came to check your vibes. So far, they are failing. Is that so? You look like the Riddler after losing a fight with a thrift store. You have no style, no game, and probably no woman waiting at home. I suppose you would have to ask your mother about that." I stepped forward. "On God. That is almost enough to make me throw hands." The man leaned on his cane. "Then step closer and see what happens." That was all the permission I needed. I pulled back my right fist, preparing a hit powerful enough to send him into the next social media trend. I had never been in a real fight, but I had watched hundreds of fight clips online. The technique seemed simple. I swung. My fist passed through empty air. The man was gone. I stumbled forward and nearly fell. For 1 second, the street was completely silent. Then his cane slammed down behind me. I turned around. He was standing in the exact place where I had been moments earlier. He had not run past me. He had not moved to the side. One moment, he had been in front of me, and the next, he was behind me. "Fake," I whispered. "No fact check needed." The man lifted his cane and pointed the skull toward me. "You came here believing you were the hunter," he said. "But you look more like a meal." The joking confidence in my chest began to disappear. My body told me to run before my mind accepted that I was afraid. "No," I said. "Unsubscribe." Then I turned and sprinted. My Crocs were already in sport mode, which probably saved my life. I ran down Ohio Boulevard as fast as I could. The empty buildings passed on both sides, their windows reflecting my movement. My breath became heavy almost immediately because gym photographs had not prepared me for real exercise. I expected to hear the man's buckle shoes striking the ground behind me. There was nothing. No footsteps, no cane, no breathing. I looked over my shoulder. He was following me. The Rizzler did not appear to be running. He moved forward with long, smooth steps, almost gliding above the road. His coat remained perfectly still around him. Although I was sprinting, the distance between us was becoming smaller. "Ain't no way," I shouted. "How are you doing that?" His voice came from directly behind me, calm and clear. "I believe you would say I'm built different." I faced forward and forced my legs to move faster. The street seemed longer than before. I should have reached the end already, but every intersection looked the same. The same broken light, the same dark shops, the same fog gathering near the pavement. My lungs burned. My phone bounced in my pocket. The Feastables bar had melted against my leg. Then I saw headlights. A car rolled toward an intersection ahead and stopped at the red light. I waved both arms and shouted. As I came closer, I recognized the vehicle. It was the same Uber that had dropped me off. The older driver was still inside. I ran to the passenger door and began hitting the window. "Help me! Open the door!" The locks clicked. Before I could reach the handle, a cold hand closed around my shoulder. Every part of my body froze. The Rizzler stood behind me. His fingers were long and thin, and they pressed through my hoodie like metal hooks. "End of the line, Sigma," he whispered near my ear. "I believe it is finally time for your lesson." I could smell something coming from his mouth. It was sweet and rotten, like flowers growing over a dead animal. The Uber driver lowered his window. "Let the kid go," he shouted. The Rizzler turned his head slowly. His smile disappeared. "This does not concern you, old man." The driver reached beneath his seat and pulled out a heavy flashlight. He pointed it at the stranger like a weapon. "I said let him go." The Rizzler stepped back slightly. That was enough. I twisted away, pushed him with both hands, and grabbed the passenger door. I threw myself into the car and slammed it shut. "Drive," I screamed. "Drive right now." The older man pressed the gas pedal. The car moved into the intersection, tires crying against the road. For one beautiful second, I thought we had escaped. Then the driver's eyes widened. The Rizzler was standing in the middle of the road ahead of us. I did not see him move there. One moment he had been behind the car, the next he was in front of us, holding his arms wide as if he intended to stop the vehicle with his body. His black coat spread around him like wings. The driver did not slow down. He pressed harder on the gas. The Rizzler hit the front of the car with a heavy bang. His body rolled across the hood and struck the windshield. For one horrible moment, his pale face was inches away from mine, on the other side of the glass. He was still smiling. Then he rolled over the roof and disappeared behind us. The car shook as the rear wheels passed over something. I turned around and looked through the back window. The street was empty. There was no body on the road. There was no blood. The Rizzler was gone. The driver kept moving until we were several blocks away. Only then did he ask whether I was hurt. "I am vibing," I said, though my hands were shaking so badly that I could barely hold my phone. "We need to call the police." "No. We hit that man. He is not a man." "That is exactly why we need the police." I imagined spending the rest of the night explaining everything to officers. They would ask why I had met a stranger at midnight. They would take my phone. They might look at my Snapchat account, my live stream history, and my private search activity. That could damage my brand. Too much drama, I said. Just take me home. The driver looked at me like he could not believe what he was hearing. Young man, someone tried to attack you. And we escaped. That means we won. That is not how this works. It is how Sigma strategy works. He sighed, but continued driving. When we reached my house, he stopped near the driveway and turned toward me. Listen carefully. Don't meet strangers in empty streets. Don't ignore people who are trying to warn you. And if you see that man again, call the police immediately. Bet. I'm serious. Low-key noted. I got out before he could continue. The house was dark. My mother's car was not in the driveway, so I assumed she had gone out with friends or had a late photo session for her foot business. I locked the front door behind me, checked every downstairs window, and went directly to my bedroom. I told myself the Rizzler could not know where I lived. He did not have my real name. My Snapchat account did not show my address. The Uber driver had lost him. Everything was fine. Before getting into bed, I checked the stranger's profile. The account no longer existed. That made me feel better for about 3 seconds. Then my phone received a notification from an unknown number. It was a photograph of my house. The picture had been taken from across the street. Beneath it was one message. Fresh vibes. Lovely home. I blocked the number immediately and pulled the curtains shut. I considered waking a neighbor or calling the police, but then I imagined how the story would sound. A man dressed like an old magician had chased me, been hit by a car, vanished, and then taken a picture of my house. They would never believe me. Besides, I was exhausted. I pushed a chair against my bedroom door, turned on every light, and eventually fell asleep while holding the can of self-defense spray. The next morning, I woke to the smell of breakfast. Bacon, eggs, toast. For a moment, I forgot the events of the night before. My mother sometimes cooked breakfast on weekends, though it was unusual on a Wednesday. I checked my phone. The picture of the house was gone. The message had disappeared too. Maybe I had dreamed it. Maybe the entire night had been the result of too much chocolate and 8 hours of Roblox. I removed the chair from my door and walked downstairs. My mother was not in the living room. Her purse was on the couch and her shoes were near the front door. I could hear someone moving in the kitchen. "Mom?" I called. No one answered. I entered the kitchen. A man stood at the stove with his back toward me. He was wearing my mother's pink bathrobe. The robe was too small for him, ending above his knees. His pale legs were bare, and his polished buckle shoes sat neatly beside the refrigerator. For several seconds, my brain refused to understand what I was seeing. "Who are you?" I asked. The man turned around. My heart nearly stopped. It was him. The bald head, the black eyes, the wide smile, the Rizzler of Ohio Street. "Hi-yo!" I shouted, stepping back. "How did you get into my house?" He held a spatula in one hand. "Good morning, Sigma." I reached for the self-defense spray, but I had left it upstairs. Before I could run, my mother entered the kitchen wearing a bright dress and open-toed shoes. "There you are," she said happily. "I was wondering when you would wake up." I pointed at the Rizzler. "Why is that man in our kitchen?" Her smile became even brighter. "So you two have met?" "Met? He tried to kill me last night." My mother laughed. "Oh, Sigma, you're always so dramatic." "I'm being dead serious." She walked over to the Rizzler and wrapped one arm around him. "We met last night," she explained. I was out with some friends, and he appeared outside the restaurant. We started talking, and one thing led to another. He is so charming. Honestly, I felt like I could not say no to him. The Rizzler kissed the side of her neck. "I hear that often," he said. As he touched her, I saw something strange happen. For half a second, my mother's eyes turned completely black. Then she blinked, and they were normal again. The Rizzler looked directly at me. "I have lived as a free man for a very long time," he said. "But after meeting your mother, I believe I am finally ready to become a one-woman man." My mother placed a hand over her heart. "That is so sweet." "No," I said. "It is not sweet. This dude chased me through the street like a demon." The Rizzler turned back to the stove. "You were running? I assumed you wanted to race." "You teleported." "Excellent footwork." "You got hit by a car." "I have always been difficult to keep down." My mother checked the time on her phone. "Oh, I'm going to be late for work." She kissed the Rizzler on the cheek, then kissed the top of my head. "I'll see you boys tonight. Try to get along. Love you." Before I could stop her, she left the house. As she walked through the kitchen, I noticed her open-toed shoes. Her toes looked unusually pale. Not normal pale. They were completely white, like they had been covered in frost. The moment the front door closed, the kitchen became silent. The Rizzler placed a plate on the table in front of me. Bacon, eggs, and toast. It smelled incredible. "Sit," he said. I remained near the doorway. "I am not eating demon breakfast. Your mother told me you need more protein. I get enough protein. You eat chocolate bars for lunch. That is creator fuel." He pulled out a chair for me. The skull from his cane sat on the kitchen counter. Its empty eye sockets seemed to follow me. I sat. I do not know why. Maybe I was afraid of what would happen if I refused. Maybe the food smelled too good. Maybe his strange charm worked on more than women. I took one bite of the eggs. They were perfect. The bacon was crisp. The toast had exactly the right amount of butter. I hated that it was the best breakfast I had ever eaten. The Rizzler sat across from me and folded his hands. "You asked me to improve your game," he said. "I never asked. You invited me. And you accepted. Because I thought you had advice." "I do." He leaned closer. "Confidence without awareness is foolishness. Style without substance is a costume. A man who refuses every warning eventually walks into the mouth of something hungry." I stopped chewing. "That advice sounds kind of valid." "I have had centuries to practice." "Centuries?" He smiled but did not answer. Over the next few days, the Rizzler never left. My mother became more obsessed with him every hour. She stopped spending time with her friends. She stopped answering work messages. She sat beside him on the couch and listened while he told stories about places that had disappeared from maps hundreds of years ago. At night, I heard them whispering in a language I did not understand. Sometimes I heard the tap of his cane moving through the hallway outside my room. Tap, step, tap, 2 steps. One night, I opened my door and found him standing at the far end of the hall. He was not wearing the bathrobe. He was dressed in his old black coat and round hat. The skull on his cane had glowing gray eyes. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Checking the house." "For what?" "Unwanted guests. You are the unwanted guest." A smile widened. "Not anymore." The following morning, my mother announced that they were getting married. I laughed because I thought she was joking. She was not. They had known each other for 3 days. I tried to reason with her. I showed her articles about dangerous relationships. I asked her friends to speak with her. I even contacted the old Uber driver, but the number was no longer active. Nobody could change her mind. A week later, she and the Rizzler married in a small ceremony behind our house. Only 6 people attended. I did not recognize any of them. They were all pale. They all wore old-fashioned clothes. None of them appeared in the photographs afterward. The Rizzler moved his belongings into the house, though I never saw any boxes. One morning, an entire locked cabinet appeared in the basement. At night, something inside it scratches against the wood. My mother insists it is nothing. The Rizzler says I should never open it. Since the wedding, he has become strangely helpful. He cooks breakfast every morning. He cleans the house. He pays the bills using coins that look hundreds of years old, but somehow turn into normal money when deposited at the bank. He also watches all my live streams. Whenever my viewer count drops, he stands behind the camera and smiles. The viewers immediately return. Last night, my stream reached 12,000 people. Every message in the chat said the same thing. Your stepfather has incredible vibes. I turned around, but the Rizzler was not in the room. Then I looked at the screen. He was standing directly behind me in the video. His hands rested on my shoulders. His face was close to mine. But when I looked over my shoulder again, no one was there. I ended the live stream immediately. This morning, he made pancakes. He told me that he was proud of my growth and that soon I would be ready to continue the family business. I asked what business he meant. He pointed toward the basement. Something inside the locked cabinet knocked 3 times. My mother smiled from across the table. Her eyes turned black again, and this time they stayed that way for almost 10 seconds. The Rizzler placed another pancake on my plate. Eat, he said. You will need your strength at midnight. So that is my situation, chat. The Rizzler of Ohio Street is now my stepfather. My mother is acting strange. There is something alive in our basement. Thousands of unknown accounts follow every move I make online. And tonight, he says I will finally learn how he became so charming. No cap. I am starting to think the Uber driver was right. I may have ignored too many warnings. I may have brought something into my home that cannot be removed. And for the first time in my life, I am willing to admit that maybe I am not built different. So I have only one question. Am I cooked? Story 3. As I write this, the time is 22:26 hours on April 3rd, 2025. For now, you can call me Rich. I cannot tell you my full name, my rank, or the exact agency I worked for. I can only say that I was connected to the United States government and had been assigned to a remote research facility deep inside the East Antarctic Plateau, somewhere in the general area between Vostok Station and Concordia Station. I am leaving this memo because I do not know what is going to happen next. In Antarctica, nothing simply drifts off course by accident. Not the wind, not the snow, not equipment, and certainly not the dead. Our facility was called Vireo Station, although that was not its official name. As far as the rest of the world was concerned, it had no name at all. It did not appear in Antarctic treaty records. It had no public satellite link, no GPS beacon, and no registered flight route. It had been built far outside the normal working zones of the known research stations, deep in a part of the plateau where nobody had any reason to travel. The fewer people who knew we existed, the safer the project was supposed to be. That included the people who delivered our supplies. Every 3 months, a U.S. Air Force C-17 Globemaster flew out of Christchurch, New Zealand. The flight crew was given a set of coordinates and a narrow window of time. That was all. They did not know who they were supplying. They did not know what kind of station was waiting below. They were ordered to follow a strict flight path, reduce all unnecessary radio traffic, and release one sealed pallet over a section of ice that looked completely empty. The supplies were dropped from high altitude while certain surveillance satellites were out of position. Even if another country tracked the aircraft or saw it on radar, there would be no clear link between the flight and our station. The pilots probably believed they were supporting some temporary atmospheric study or classified field exercise. They were never told about Vireo. My own role was simple, at least on paper. My title was Field System Specialist. In reality, that meant I was responsible for almost everything that did not involve medicine or laboratory work. I repaired generators. I maintained the heating system. I fixed electrical faults, radio equipment, water lines, diesel engines, batteries, antenna mounts, and anything else that broke. I was the person crawling through snow with a wrench in one hand and a multimeter in the other, while the temperature was low enough to kill a man in minutes. I knew very little about the work being done in the laboratory. That was normal. Vireo Station operated under strict separation rules. Each person knew only what was required to complete their assigned tasks. I knew that my co-workers were collecting samples and studying something found beneath the ice, but nobody explained the complete purpose of the project. We were there to do science. That was the answer whenever I asked. The other three members of the team were Mark, Keller, and Anya. Mark handled data systems and much of the station's computer work. Keller worked in the laboratory and had enough knowledge of electronics to be dangerous. Anya was the lead scientist, although even she seemed to receive instructions from people outside the station. We lived together, ate together, and trusted one another with our lives, but I am not sure any of us knew the others completely. Looking back, I do not even know whether those were their real names. Whenever a supply drop was scheduled, I had one task. I had to drive exactly 25 statute miles due north from Vireo's hidden position and recover the pallet. GPS equipment was forbidden during normal operations. We did have several military GD-300 navigation devices stored inside a protected case in the communications room. They were encrypted, disconnected from any outside system, and kept inside a Faraday cage. We were allowed to use them only during a true life or death emergency or after receiving direct orders. No tracking signals, no outside transmissions, no exceptions. For navigation, I used a map, a compass, the vehicle's odometer, and a wristwatch. The vehicle assigned to me was a BV-206, a two-part tracked carrier built for deep snow. It had originally been made by Hägglunds in Sweden and was designed to move over ice, mud, and rough ground that would stop most normal vehicles. Ours had been modified for Antarctic use. The fuel system had been strengthened. The doors and windows had extra insulation. The engine had a heavy Arctic preheater. The tracks spread the vehicle's weight across the snow, allowing it to pass over soft drifts without sinking too deeply. It was slow, loud, and ugly, but it was reliable. At least I thought it was. I left Vireo in the middle of the morning. The weather forecast showed a small, low-pressure system near Dome C, but nothing dangerous. The sky was clear, and the air was unusually sharp. Visibility was close to 100 kilometers. I checked my compass, set my heading to true north, and moved out in low gear. The BV-206 rumbled across the ice at around 25 kilometers per hour. The suspension moved gently over the ridges in the snow. Behind me, Vireo Station slowly became smaller until it vanished against the white landscape. There were no roads. There were no mountains, trees, buildings, or other landmarks. There was only ice The wind had carved long, hard ridges called sastrugi across the surface. Some were low enough to drive over. Others could damage the track system if hit at the wrong angle. The journey was supposed to take no more than 3 hours in total. Drive out, collect the pallet, drive back, eat rehydrated stew. Nothing complicated. I reached the drop zone without trouble. The supply pallet had landed almost exactly where expected. Its bright orange parachute was still attached and pulling violently in the wind, trying to drag the heavy load across the snow. There were 6 large crates secured to the metal platform. I cut the lines, removed the straps, and loaded each crate into the rear section of the BV. Even through my thick gloves, my fingers hurt from the cold and the weight. Once everything was secured, I checked the compass again and started back toward Vireo. The first part of the return trip was normal. Then, after traveling around 45 kilometers, the air pressure began dropping much faster than expected. The weather system near Dome C had strengthened. A warm core polar storm was moving in from the east, pushed by unstable air from the direction of Queen Maud Land. Within 30 minutes, my visibility dropped from almost 30 kilometers to less than 300 meters. Then it became even worse. A whiteout is not simply heavy snow. During a true whiteout, the ground and sky disappear into the same color. There is no clear horizon. You cannot judge distance. You cannot tell whether the surface ahead rises, falls, or remains flat. Everything becomes a bright, empty space with no depth. The only things I could see were the 2 yellow beams from the BV's front lights. They reached into the snow like weak tunnels through milk. My compass showed a heading of 180 degrees true south, which was the direction back to Vireo. I held to that number as if it were the only thing keeping me alive. There were no cliffs or trees to hit, but that did not mean the route was safe. We had marked several areas on our maps where hidden cracks might exist beneath the snow. A large crevasse could swallow the entire vehicle before I even knew it was there. Crosswinds pushed against the side of the BV. The machine groaned and shifted. I kept one hand near the compass repeater and corrected my direction in small movements. The wind kept trying to carry me west. All I could do was trust the vehicle's odometer, estimate how much the tracks were slipping, and hope the compass remained accurate. By the time I reached the station area, the storm had covered everything. The outer structures appeared slowly through the snow like ghosts. The heliostat mounts were buried almost halfway. The communications tower moved in the wind, bending farther than I had ever seen it bend before. I drove around the thermal equipment building and stopped in front of the station's main airlock. Something was wrong. The outer door was sealed. During severe weather, Vireo entered Condition 2. That meant the station was locked down. I understood the rule. What I did not understand was the silence. Mark, Keller, and Anya should have been monitoring the radio from the moment I left until the moment I returned. That was standard procedure. I picked up the microphone. TARS 5, this is Rich. I am on final approach. Open the outer door. There was no answer. I tried again. Nothing. I changed to the backup frequency. Then I tried the old maintenance channel we sometimes used when working on equipment. Still nothing. The carrier light on the radio showed that the system was active, but no voice came through. I told myself the communications rack might have iced over. Maybe there had been a power fault. I even joked quietly that Keller had probably tried to connect the kitchen toaster to the radio system again. He had once caused a station-wide electrical failure by rerouting power from a radio amplifier so he could heat food faster. At the time, we had laughed about it for days. I left the BV idling. The cabin heater held the temperature at 38 degrees Celsius. I removed my gloves, opened my thermos, and leaned back in the driver's seat. I decided to wait a few minutes and try the radio again. The storm would weaken. Someone would answer. I closed my eyes for what felt like a second. When I opened them, pale light filled the windshield. It was morning. The BV was silent. The engine had stopped. The heater was dead. Ice covered the inside of the windows in thin, branching lines. The air inside the cabin was painfully cold. My feet were numb. My hands barely moved. The skin around my knuckles had begun turning dark. Then I understood what had happened. I had fallen asleep. The BV had run out of fuel while idling. I had spent hours inside a metal box during an Antarctic storm with no heat and no working communications. I could have died without waking. The door handle would not move at first. Ice had formed around the frame. I braced myself against the seat and kicked the door. It broke open with a crack like a gunshot. Wind and snow exploded into the cabin. That was when I saw the footprints. There was one set of boot prints in the snow. They came from the direction of the station. They led directly to the driver's side of the BV. They stopped beside the door. Fresh snow had already begun filling them, but they were still clear enough to see. Someone had walked from the station during the night. Someone had stood beside the vehicle. Someone had looked inside. Then that person had left me there. I climbed down from the cabin and sank into snow almost to my waist. The cold cut through my clothing immediately. The storm was still blowing hard. I followed the marker poles toward the airlock. The main door was partly open. No light came from inside. I could hear wind moving through a dead ventilation system. I stepped into the outer room, shut the door behind me, and entered the station. Everything was silent. Then I smelled blood. The odor reached me when I opened the inner airlock door. It was faint because of the cold, but I recognized it immediately. Metal, salt, and something sour beneath it. My headlamp shone into the main living area. Papers were scattered across the floor. A chair had been knocked over. Cups and food containers lay near the mess table. Then I saw Keller. He was sitting at the table. For one foolish second, I thought he had fallen asleep. I hurried toward him and nearly slipped on the frozen floor. Then I saw the hole in the side of his head. Keller was slumped forward with his face resting in a broken bowl of frozen chicken noodle soup. His body was stiff. His eyes were open. Blood had flowed from the wound near his right temple and frozen into a dark red line. An icicle of blood stretched from his head to a hard crimson pool on the floor. The bullet had passed through his skull and left another wound near the back of his shoulder. His dead eyes seemed to be looking directly at me. I stepped backward and struck the wall. The station had been our home. Now it was a tomb. I forced myself toward the laboratory. Each step felt unreal. My boots crushed broken glass in the corridor. The sound echoed through the station. The laboratory door was open. The room had been destroyed. Equipment lay on the floor. Cabinets had been pulled open. Sample tubes were broken. Papers, folders, and storage boxes had been thrown everywhere. This was not random damage. Someone had searched the room. Anya was lying near the centrifuge. A dark pool had frozen beneath her. She had been shot in the back of the head at close range. Blood had sprayed across the equipment in front of her. Her eyes were open. Her face showed no surprise, only emptiness. Mark was still sitting in his chair near the main computer station. His body had collapsed over the desk. A bullet had passed through his neck, continued through the monitor, and struck the wall behind him. One hand remained on the keyboard, as if he had died while trying to type something. I could not breathe. Mark, Keller, and Anya were not simply dead. They had been executed. Whoever killed them had moved through the station calmly and with purpose. They had shot each person quickly, then searched the laboratory. I backed out into the corridor. I needed air. I needed heat. I needed to restore the station's power before the generator froze permanently, and I joined the others. I did not know how long the power had been off. I fought my way outside and reached the generator building. The generator had not failed. It had been shut down by hand. The main breakers were off. The fuel valves were closed. Whoever had killed my team wanted the station to freeze. I opened the fuel lines, reset the breakers, and primed the system. The generator coughed several times before starting. Then it roared to life. Power returned slowly. Emergency lights flickered inside the station. Fans began turning. Pumps started moving warm fluid through the heating system. The temperature began to rise. I still felt cold. I locked every door. Then I entered the communications room. The satellite system had been destroyed. Wires had been cut. Connectors had been pulled out. Circuit boards had been damaged. When I checked the outside antenna, I discovered that the feed horn had been removed with a power tool, probably an angle grinder. The old shortwave radio still had power, so I tried every emergency channel I knew. I transmitted on Antarctic field frequencies, aviation, search and rescue bands, maritime channels, and old military frequencies. Nobody answered. Then I noticed the empty Faraday cage. All of the GD-300 navigation devices were gone. Every one of them. I returned to the laboratory and began checking what else was missing. Several files had been removed. Cabinets were empty. Data drives were gone. Many of the sample containers had been broken or taken. The containers marked Site Delta were almost all missing. I did not know exactly what Site Delta was. I only knew that the label had appeared on sealed cases and laboratory reports during the previous 2 months. Whoever entered Vireo had not come only to kill us. They had come for something specific. Samples, data, evidence. The storm continued for several days. Sometimes the wind screamed against the walls for hours. At other times, it became strangely calm, making me believe the weather had finally passed. Then the wind returned even stronger. I kept the station sealed. The supply crates I had recovered contained enough food for 4 people. Military meal packs, powdered soup, vacuum-sealed snacks, and other food designed to last for years. I dragged every crate inside by myself, pulling them through nearly 3 feet of snow. With careful rationing, I believed I could survive for almost a year. Food was not the main problem. The station felt different after the murders. It had not changed in size, but it seemed much larger. Every hallway felt longer. Every empty room seemed to be waiting for someone. Without the others, each sound became important. A pipe moving, metal shrinking in the cold, a door settling in its frame. The bodies began to thaw after I restored the heating system. I shut off the heat in several unused sections to save power, but the storage room where I placed them was too well insulated. The temperature remained high enough for decay to begin. The smell moved into nearby rooms. I could not leave them there. One afternoon, I wrapped each body in emergency mylar blankets and placed them inside heavy sleeping bags. Then I carried them outside one at a time. There was a flat area behind the generator building where the wind kept the snow from becoming too deep. I used a folding shovel to dig 3 shallow trenches in the frozen ground. The ice was too hard for a true grave, but I dug enough space to place the bodies beside one another. I marked each grave with a simple identification card attached to a stake. Keller, Anya, Mark. As I stood there, I wondered again whether those names were real. Maybe none of us had known one another. Maybe that had always been the point. After burying them, I returned to a routine. Routine was the only thing keeping me sane. Every morning, I inspected the generator. I checked voltage levels in the backup batteries. I recorded temperatures in each part of the station. I tested pumps, heaters, relays, and emergency systems. I completed the same tasks at the same time each day. On the 8th day, the generator stopped. There was no warning. The lights did not flicker first. No alarm sounded. The engine did not cough or struggle. It simply died. The station always carried a low vibration when the power system was running. It moved through the floor and walls. When the generator stopped, it felt as if something had removed the life from the building. I was heating a meal packet when the lights became dim and the ventilation fans slowed to silence. I ran to the generator room. The 30-kilowatt diesel unit was completely dead. The fuel tank was half full. The oil level was normal. The battery was charged. The control panel showed a general fault, but no useful code. I began checking the system. Fuel filter clear, fuel line open, no blockage. The fuel pump made no sound. I bled the line and primed it again. Nothing. The starter solenoid clicked, but the engine did not turn. I used a jumper wire to bypass the ignition relay. It was dangerous, but I had no other choice. Still nothing. I removed the access panel and touched the injector rail. Cold, dead. The engine block seemed completely seized, even though the preheater had been working and there had been no signs of damage. I had spare belts, filters, fluids, and basic repair parts. I did not have a second generator. The main power system was finished. Vireo had a small solar panel array on the north side of the station, but during the Antarctic winter, it produced very little energy. At best, it gave me around 300 watts during the brightest part of the day. That was enough for a few lights and a slow battery charge. It was not enough to heat the entire station. I shut down every non-essential system. Then I returned to the communications room. I hoped I might repair the satellite equipment before the batteries ran out. The damage was worse than I first believed. Someone had poured a sticky liquid across several circuit boards. The substance had dried into a dark layer and destroyed the components. The main coaxial cables had been cut cleanly instead of pulled free. Whoever did it understood the system. They knew exactly which parts to destroy. I stripped the main line, connected power from the backup battery rack, and routed the signal through the auxiliary ports. Nothing happened. The modem did not start. The backup board had burn marks across several connections. Tiny components were cracked. There was no way to repair it with the tools I had. The shortwave radio and one handheld unit were all that remained. I called for help again. I tried high frequency, ultra-high frequency, old research channels, emergency aviation bands, and international distress frequencies. The transmitter worked. The carrier signal was present. Nobody answered. Either nobody could hear me or nobody wanted to respond. That was when I made my decision. I would prepare the BV-206 and travel to Vostok Station. Vostok was approximately 402 statute miles southwest of Vireo. The route crossed open plateau filled with hard snow ridges, hidden cracks, and nothing else. It was a terrible plan. It was also my only plan. Concordia Station was closer. but reaching it would not help. During the overwintered period, Concordia followed strict isolation procedures. No one entered or left. That was not cruelty. It was survival. Opening a station during the Antarctic winter could expose the crew to contamination, illness, or equipment failure. There were no normal rescue flights during that season, and no easy ground route. Concordia might as well have been on another planet. Vireo did not follow the same rules because Vireo officially did not exist. We had no public medical program, no formal isolation system, no outside oversight. If one of us died, no government was required to explain it. Vostok was operated by Russia, which created its own risks, but I could not imagine the Russians killing an American technician who appeared half-frozen at their door. Whatever had happened at Vireo, I believed my best chance was to reach a place with power, food, people, and a working radio. I prepared the BV by hand. I filled the main fuel tank. I loaded 4 reserve fuel cans into the rear section and secured them tightly. I packed meal rations, snacks, sealed water containers, a small cooking stove, propane, 2 sleeping systems with thermal liners, an ice axe, a shovel, a pick, spare tools, and several days of batteries. The batteries were kept inside an insulated case. In extreme cold, batteries can lose power quickly or become damaged by moisture. I mounted an emergency high-frequency antenna on the roof and added a long trailing wire. The engine started normally. It idled with a steady sound as the preheater warmed the system. I checked the flux gate compass and set my heading to 189.61 degrees, the calculated route from Vireo to Vostok. Before leaving, I completed one final inspection of the station. The graves behind the generator building were already disappearing beneath the snow. I climbed into the driver's seat, shut the door, and moved forward. The tracks gripped the hard drift. I left Vireo behind. I was alone. 2 hours into the journey, the front left track lost tension. I felt it before any warning appeared on the panel. The BV pulled sharply left. Then I heard a heavy slap and a grinding sound beneath the vehicle. I reduced speed and stopped. Outside, the wind was not especially strong, but the cold entered through every weak point in my clothing. There was no sunlight. The Antarctic winter created a long, dim twilight, a silver-gray band around the horizon. There were no stars and no true daytime, only endless ice and shadow. I crouched beside the front track system. The leading section had slipped away from the front wheel. Part of the track had folded and dragged beneath the vehicle. The damage was serious. I could not continue driving without repairing it. The engine could remain running and keep me warm, but the BV was trapped. Repairing the track would require several hours beneath the vehicle in temperatures around minus 40 degrees Celsius with wind chill. One mistake could crush my hand. One loose tool could disappear into the snow. One failed engine cycle could leave me without heat. I shouted several curses into the wind. Then I saw the light. It was low on the horizon, perhaps 2 miles away. Blue, soft, steady. At first I thought it might be a small section of aurora, but the light was too low and too focused. It seemed to be coming from the ground. I climbed back into the BV, found the binoculars, and looked through the windshield. There was no tower, no building, no vehicle. Only one small point of blue-white light. I opened my map across the rear seat. There should have been nothing in that area. No weather equipment, no field camp, no marked route, no natural feature. I turned on the radio. Any station on this network, this is TARS 5 Mobile. Do you receive me? Over. TARS-5 was the call sign used for emergency communications. It stood for Temporary Atmospheric Research Shelter, a harmless name created to hide Vireo's real purpose. Only static answered. I sat for several minutes looking at the light. It could have been help. It could have been a generator, a hidden station, or an emergency beacon. I packed a day bag, put on my outer clothing, and left the BV. The weather was still manageable. Wind came from the east at around 5 to 10 knots. Low clouds were forming on the horizon, but the worst part of the storm had not arrived. I decided to walk to the light, inspect it, and return within 1 hour. I left the BV running. The battery remained warm, the alternator was charging, and the cabin temperature stayed near 30 degrees Celsius. I filled the fuel tank from one of the reserve cans and left the valve partly open so it could continue feeding the system. Before walking away, I placed a tall wooden stake beside the vehicle and tied reflective fluorescent tape around it. The BV's lights were visible, but I wanted a second marker. If snow covered the vehicle or the engine stopped, the tape might help me find my way back. I began walking. The snow was dry and loose. Snowshoes were almost useless. Each step sank below my knees. I moved quickly but tried not to sweat. Moisture inside clothing can freeze and kill a person faster than the cold itself. The blue light remained steady. After around 10 minutes, I saw another one, then a third. More points of blue light appeared across the snow. They were spaced unevenly, each surrounded by a faint glowing mist. After 36 minutes, I reached the closest one. It was a cube. The object was about 1 meter high, 1 meter wide, and 1 meter deep. Every side was perfectly equal. Its surface was completely white, not painted white, not covered in snow. It was a kind of white that seemed almost impossible, as though it reflected nearly all light. A thick fog moved over its surface like vapor rolling from dry ice. The cube rested flat against the ground. There were no seams, no openings, no buttons, no lights. The blue glow had no clear source. Neither did the mist. I walked slowly around it. I raised one hand but stopped before touching the surface. Something inside me warned me not to make contact. I felt frightened and strangely amazed. Then I looked at my wrist. My watch was dead. The screen was black. I tapped it several times. Nothing. There was no ice on it. No visible damage. It had simply stopped working. I turned north and looked toward the BV. The vehicle was still visible in the distance, a small yellow light against the gray landscape. The weather was getting worse. I wanted to examine the other cubes, but I knew I had to return before the storm reached me. I turned away and began walking back. Then I heard the sound. It started as a thin, high tone at the edge of hearing. At first, I thought it was coming from my radio or from pressure inside my ears. Then it grew stronger. The sound was mechanical and organic at the same time. It reminded me of electrical noise, but it had several layers beneath it. The vibration moved through my teeth. I stopped. My ears hurt. I turned around. The cube was gone. A hole had appeared where it had been. The opening was a perfect square, 1 meter by 1 meter. The snow around it had not moved. There were no broken edges, no cracks, no signs that anything had fallen through. It looked like a square piece of reality had been removed. I walked toward it. The high sound became louder. Beneath the tone was a deep vibration, almost too low to hear. I reached the edge and looked down. There was no darkness inside the hole. There was sky, bright blue sky, white clouds, sunlight. It was not a reflection. It had depth. It looked like summer. The square opening seemed to be a window into another place. The view was peaceful, warm, beautiful. My stomach turned. The pressure inside my ears changed, like I was descending too quickly in an aircraft. My balance shifted. I stepped backward and almost fell. Snow began blowing across the ground. The storm was coming. I turned and ran toward the BV. The strange sound weakened as I moved away. The wind increased. Snow struck my goggles and covered my tracks. The yellow glow from the vehicle appeared and disappeared through the blowing powder. Then the sky exploded. It was not a normal explosion. There was no fire and no blast of air. It sounded like electricity tearing through the atmosphere. The world behind me became white. I turned. Every cube across the plateau had opened. Huge columns of white light shot upward from the ground and passed through the clouds. The storm became brighter than daylight. Each snowflake reflected the light. The entire landscape looked like it had been placed beneath enormous stadium lamps. I panicked. I ran as hard as I could. The wind erased the ground. Snow and light surrounded me. I could no longer see the horizon or the vehicle. My lungs burned. Ice formed on my scarf. I coughed and struggled to breathe. Then I vomited inside my mask. The BV's light disappeared. I had lost it. I tried to continue, but my legs failed. I fell to my knees. The wind pushed against my body. I believed I was going to die. Then something rose from the snow in front of me. Another cube. It appeared slowly and without sound. Mist rolled from its white surface like breath. It was identical to the others. Perfect. Clean. Impossible. I crawled toward it. My hands and knees pushed through the drifts. Cold entered my joints and moved through my body. The cube glowed in front of me. I stopped only a few feet away and stared through the blowing snow. I removed my right glove. The cold attacked my bare skin immediately. My fingers began to burn. I reached toward the cube. At that moment, the storm no longer frightened me. I felt calm. I accepted that I was going to die. There was no station, no vehicle, no rescue. Only the cube and the frozen desert. I thought of the graves behind Vireo. I thought of Keller's face in the bowl of soup. I thought of Mark's hand on the keyboard. I thought of Anya on the laboratory floor. Maybe death would be easier than continuing. The cube lit my arm and bare hand. My fingers touched its surface. There was a flash of white light. Then silence. Warmth. Peace. Nothing. Darkness. When I woke, the first thing I felt was heat. It was thick, dry, and completely wrong. My body shook violently from the sudden change in temperature. My face was pressed against the rough soil warmed by the sun. I smelled dust, dry grass, and wheat. I opened my eyes. Above me was a brilliant blue sky. Golden plants moved in a warm breeze. Everything sounded too loud. Insects buzzed nearby. Birds called in the distance. Thousands of dry stalks brushed against one another. A faint ringing remained in my ears. I rolled onto my side and vomited again. My heavy parka clung to me. I was still wearing all of my Antarctic gear. Every strap, zipper, boot, and piece of equipment was present. The weight of my clothing became unbearable in the heat. I pushed myself onto my knees. My hands sank into dark, healthy soil. I looked around. There was no ice, no storm, no cube, no Vireo station, no BV-206. There were only wheat fields stretching in every direction. A rusted barbed wire fence crossed part of the land. Far away, I could see a pale water tower rising above the fields. I stood and turned slowly. I had no idea where I was. Then I saw the ground beneath the place where I had been lying. A square section of soil had been burned black. It was exactly 1 meter by 1 meter. The edges were perfectly straight. My right hand still hurt. I looked at my bare palm. The skin was red and raw, but it was still there. I could almost feel the cube beneath my fingers. I checked my radio. It was destroyed. No power, no signal. The circuits smelled burned. My watch was still black. I was somewhere else, somewhere warm, somewhere that looked normal, somewhere real. But I knew the moment I stood in that wheat field that something was wrong. The sky was blue. The sun was warm. The air smelled alive. Yet there were no aircraft sounds, no farm equipment, no distant traffic. The wheat moved in the breeze, but the field seemed endless. I began walking toward the water tower because it was the only sign of human life. My boots were made for ice and deep snow. They felt heavy and clumsy on the dry ground. Sweat formed inside my clothing almost immediately. I removed my hood and unzipped my outer jacket, but I was still dressed for temperatures that could freeze skin in seconds. After walking for several minutes, I stopped and listened. The insects had become silent. The birds were gone. Even the wheat had stopped moving. The air was completely still. I turned around. The burned square was no longer visible. The field behind me looked untouched. I tried my radio again. Nothing. I checked the compass attached to my gear. The needle spun slowly in a circle. It did not point north. It continued turning without stopping. I looked toward the water tower. It seemed no closer than before. I had been walking directly toward it, yet the distance had not changed. That was when I understood. The cube had not saved me. It had brought me somewhere. And whatever this place was, it was not home. Etbra fog. I never truly understood the term phantom limb until I lost my arm. I had heard the words before. I had seen veterans in documentaries talk about feeling pain in hands or feet that were no longer there. I knew, in a basic way, that the brain sometimes continued to sense a missing body part. I assumed it was like an itch that could not be scratched or a strange tingling that came and went. I had no idea how real it could feel. I had no idea that something missing could still follow you. I am not a soldier. I did not lose my arm in battle. I did not lose it while saving someone from a burning building or pulling a child out of traffic. There was nothing brave or meaningful about what happened to me. It was simply a chain of bad decisions and terrible luck. A few friends and I had planned a weekend hiking trip in a wooded area several hours from the city. We were not professional climbers or survival experts. We were office workers who liked to pretend we were outdoorsmen a few times a year. The area had several easy climbing routes, nothing especially dangerous. We brought ropes, helmets, food, tents, and more equipment than we probably needed. The weather was clear, and everything seemed perfect. The accident happened on the first afternoon. We had reached a rocky section near the trail. It was not a high cliff, but it was steep enough that we decided to use ropes. I had climbed only 20 or 30 feet when one of my boots slipped. For a second, I fell. The rope caught me quickly, but as I dropped, my left arm scraped across a sharp piece of stone. It sliced through my sleeve and opened the skin from below my elbow almost to my wrist. The pain was sharp, but it did not seem serious at the time. My first concern was my legs. I had swung hard against the rock, and I was sure I had broken something. But once I realized my legs were fine, the cut on my arm seemed unimportant. My friends pulled me back to a safe ledge. One of them looked at the wound and frowned. "You might need stitches." "It's not that deep," I said. I was wrong, but I did not want to ruin the trip. We had driven hours to get there. Everyone had taken time off work, bought supplies, and spent money on equipment. I did not want to be the reason we turned around. I rinsed the cut with water from my bottle, pressed a bandana against it, and wrapped it tightly. The bleeding slowed. That was good enough for me. We continued hiking. That evening, we set up camp on the ground near a narrow stream. I cleaned the wound again and covered it with antibiotic ointment from our first aid kit. The skin around it was sore, but I expected that. We spent the night eating canned food, drinking beer, and telling stories around a small fire. By Saturday morning, my arm hurt more. The cut looked red and swollen, but I told myself that was normal. I replaced the bandage and kept going. We hiked most of the day. I sweated beneath my jacket, and dirt got under the edge of the bandage. I knew I should clean it, but we were far from camp, and I did not want to stop everyone. By Saturday night, I felt tired and slightly sick. Again, I blamed the hiking. We had walked for miles, climbed rocks, carried heavy bags, and slept badly. Anyone would have felt exhausted. On Sunday morning, the pain had spread farther up my arm. Red lines had begun to appear around the wound. One of my friends noticed them while we were packing. He grabbed my wrist carefully and turned my arm toward the light. "Those marks don't look good. It's just irritated." "No," he said. "Those red lines could mean infection." He looked toward the forest around us. "There's no telling what you could have picked up out here. You should have a doctor look at it." I promised him I would keep an eye on it. That was another bad decision. We drove home that afternoon. By the time I reached my apartment, I felt drained. My whole body ached and my skin felt unusually warm. I took some Tylenol, cleaned the wound again, and covered it with a large bandage. I turned up the air conditioning because the apartment felt too hot, and went to bed early. I expected to wake up Monday morning feeling normal. Instead, I woke up in the middle of the night with a pounding headache and a high fever. My sheets were soaked with sweat. My mouth was dry, and every muscle in my body felt weak. I took more Tylenol and drank water, but I could not fall back asleep. I kept moving between feeling too hot and suddenly freezing. When I pulled the blankets over myself, I sweated. When I pushed them away, I shook with cold. At around 4 a.m, I gave up on sleeping and went into the living room. I sat on the couch and turned on the television. I did not really watch it. The images moved across the screen while I stared through them. When 6 o'clock came, I called my job and said I was sick. By then, I felt even worse. I still believed I might have caught the flu or a bad cold while camping. It was only when I lifted my hand to wipe sweat from my forehead that I saw the red lines running up my arm. They had spread. The marks that had been faint on Sunday were now dark and angry. They stretched from the infected cut toward my shoulder like thin red branches beneath the skin. I stood too quickly and nearly fell. My legs felt weak as I stumbled into the bathroom. Under the bright light, the wound looked much worse than it had the day before. The skin around it was swollen, hot, and shiny. A cloudy liquid had gathered beneath the bandage. Panic finally broke through my stubbornness. I filled the bathtub with warm water and tried to clean my arm. I scrubbed too hard, hoping I could somehow wash the infection away. The pain was terrible. The wound looked even angrier afterward. I dried myself, dressed, and called a ride to the emergency room. I did not trust myself to drive. I knew something was wrong. I just did not understand how wrong. The emergency room was crowded. Every seat seemed occupied. Children cried, people coughed, and a television mounted in the corner played a morning news show with the sound turned low. I waited for nearly 4 hours. By the time a nurse called my name, I could barely stand. They took my temperature, examined the red lines, and moved me into a treatment room much faster after that. A doctor came in, looked at the wound, and asked me what had happened. I explained the hiking accident and admitted that I had waited several days. His expression became serious. "The cut is badly infected," he said. "We want to keep you for a few days and run some tests." "A few days?" "We're concerned about the fever and how quickly your symptoms appeared. They started antibiotics through an IV. I remember feeling relieved. An infection sounded manageable. Hospitals treated infections every day. I assumed the medicine would work, my fever would drop, and I would go home by the end of the week. That did not happen. 2 days later, I received worse news. The original infection from the woods was not responding as well as they had hoped. More importantly, tests showed that I had developed MRSA, a dangerous antibiotic-resistant infection. The doctors believed I had been exposed to it. After arriving at the hospital, I had entered the building with one infection and picked up another while lying in bed. My arm became redder, more swollen, and far more painful. It felt as though the bones themselves were burning. The skin tightened until even the smallest movement hurt. The doctors changed medications. Then they changed them again. Each morning, someone came into my room with more serious news. By Friday, they were telling me the infection was not responding to antibiotics. By Saturday, they were talking about removing damaged tissue. By Monday, they were discussing amputation. The surgeon sat beside my bed with a folder in her hands. "The infection is spreading too quickly," she said. "If we don't remove the arm, it could enter your bloodstream. Once that happens, your condition could become much harder to control." I stared at her. "You want to cut off my arm?" "We want to save your life." "There has to be another option." "We've tried the available antibiotics. The infection is moving toward your shoulder. If we wait too long, we may lose the chance to stop it there." She spoke calmly, but I could hear the urgency beneath her voice. "If we act now, we believe we can preserve the shoulder. If we delay, we might have to remove more." The hospital offered to cover the surgery. I suspected it was because my insurance company was already questioning how I had contracted MRSA while under hospital care. None of that mattered much to me. I could not stop looking at my arm. It had been healthy less than a week earlier. I had used that hand every day of my life without thinking about it. I typed with it, opened doors with it, tied my shoes with it, and carried groceries with it. Now doctors were telling me it had to be removed. I wanted to refuse. I wanted to leave the hospital and find someone who would give me better news. But I was out of options. As much as I feared living with one arm, I feared dying more. I signed the papers. They scheduled the surgery for Wednesday, though they warned me it might be moved forward if my condition worsened. I barely slept the night before. I kept touching my fingers, feeling each joint and nail. I moved my wrist in circles. I pressed my palm against the mattress. I tried to memorize the feeling of having two hands. Sometime early Wednesday morning, they took me to surgery. When I woke up, my left arm was gone. For several minutes, I did not understand. The medication made everything slow and distant. The room seemed to tilt whenever I opened my eyes. Then I looked down. A thick bandage covered what remained of my upper arm. My hand, wrist, elbow, and most of my arm were no longer there. I stared at the empty space beside me. I did not cry. I did not scream. I simply looked at the place where my arm had been and felt nothing. The doctors had me on strong pain medicine, sedatives, and antibiotics. My mind drifted in and out. Nurses came and went. People asked me questions, and I gave answers I could not remember later. At first, I thought the medicine was responsible for everything that happened next. I woke up late Thursday night with the strangest sensation I had ever experienced. My missing arm was there. Not physically, of course. I could see that it was gone. But I could feel every part of it. I could feel my fingers flexing. I felt the tiny hairs along my forearm. I felt pressure on my elbow as though it rested against a hard surface. My palm felt cold. It was not a vague tingling. It felt completely real. I tried to move the fingers. The phantom fingers moved. I tried to bend my wrist. The missing wrist bent. A wave of nausea passed through me. It felt like my arm was still connected to my body and somewhere else at the same time. Then I realized that the cold sensation beneath my phantom fingertips felt like tile. Hospital floor tile. I lay motionless in the darkness. Outside my room, the hallway lights had been lowered. Machines beeped quietly, and air moved through the vents. Then I heard something coming down the hall. Thump, 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 thump. I held my breath. The sound stopped. A few seconds later, it began again. Thump, 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 thump. It sounded like a small animal moving across the floor, not claws. There was no clicking. It was more like the soft impact of little feet. I stared at the open doorway. The sound came closer. Thump, 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 thump. I told myself it was a nurse pushing equipment. Maybe one wheel on a cart was damaged. Maybe someone was dragging a bag. But no cart made a sound like that. The rhythm was too uneven, too alive. Thump, 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 thump. Why would a small animal be wandering through a hospital after midnight? Surely a nurse would see it. Surely someone would remove it. I looked at the clock beside my bed. It was just after midnight. The sound reached my doorway. Then it stepped into the room. I could not breathe. It was my arm. My entire left arm stood in the doorway, balanced on its fingers. The cut was gone. The swollen skin and red lines had disappeared. It looked exactly as it had before the accident. The hand was pressed against the floor, and the fingers supported the weight like spider legs. The wrist rose above them, followed by the forearm and upper arm. Dark hair covered the skin. At the shoulder end was a smooth section where it should have connected to my body. There was no blood. It had no eyes, but I knew it was looking at me. The feeling was impossible to explain. The arm faced in my direction, and I felt its attention pressing against me. It was accusing me, asking why I had allowed them to cut it away. I began to scream. The arm moved backward into the hallway just as nurses ran toward my room. 2 of them entered, followed by an orderly. What happened? My arm, I shouted. It was in the doorway. One nurse looked at the empty entrance. What do you mean? My arm. The one they removed. It was standing there. The nurses exchanged a glance. One of them checked my IV and then placed a hand on my shoulder. It's the medication, dear, she said. These drugs can cause very strange dreams. I was awake. I'm sure it felt that way. It was right there. I pointed toward the doorway. She smiled gently. If a detached human arm were walking around the hospital, someone would have noticed. I looked again. The doorway was empty. I felt embarrassed. Of course it was the medicine. What else could it have been? I apologized for scaring them. The nurse assured me that it was fine. She checked my temperature, adjusted my blanket, and told me to rest. After they left, I pulled the covers over myself and closed my eyes. I was almost asleep when I heard fingers tapping on the nightstand. Thump, 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 thump. My eyes opened beneath the blanket. Through the thin fabric, I could see a shadow sitting on the tray beside my bed. Thump, 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 thump. Each finger struck the surface one at a time. I could hear the knuckles crack. I could hear tendons stretching and bones creaking. I lifted the edge of the blanket just enough to look. The arm was perched on the tray. Its fingers drummed impatiently against the wood. Again, it had no eyes. Again, it stared at me. I felt the tapping in my missing hand at the same time I watched it happen. Each finger that struck the table sent a clear sensation through my phantom limb. It made me dizzy. I pulled the covers over my head. As a child, a blanket had always felt like protection from monsters. If something frightening was inside the room, hiding beneath the covers made it easier to pretend it was not there. But I was no longer a child, and this monster had once been part of me. Thump, 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 thump. I tried to convince myself I was dreaming. I told myself I would wake up in my tent with both arms. The hiking trip, the infection, the surgery, and the hospital would all disappear. I waited. The tapping continued. No nurse came in. I did not wake up. The longer I listened, the more frustrated I became. The sound drilled into my head. Thump, 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 thump. I clenched my remaining fist. It was just an arm. I still had one hand. I was not going to let the missing one torture me. I threw the blanket aside. The arm remained on the table. It did not disappear when I looked directly at it. The skin was slightly tanned. Coarse black hair covered the forearm. The fingers curled against the surface. "What?" I growled. My voice sounded weak, but I kept going. "What do you want from me?" The fingers stopped. The arm lifted slightly, as though listening. "Why are you here?" I demanded. Before I could say more, the lights came on. "Good morning," someone said. "How are we feeling today?" I turned toward the door. My doctor walked into the room carrying a tablet. Morning light filled the hallway. A pink line of sunrise showed through the window. I had somehow spent the whole night hiding under the blanket. When I looked back at the table, the arm was gone. "Are you okay?" the doctor asked. She touched my forehead. "You feel warm? Are you dizzy?" Before I could answer, something tapped against the glass. Thump, 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 thump. I slowly looked toward the window. The arm was outside. It stood on its fingers along the narrow outer windowsill. Several floors of empty air separated it from the pavement below. Wind moved through the dark hairs along its skin.